Budget Committee information session. I would please ask that you all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our country's flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At least we can do one official. All right, my name is Stan Heinrich. I'm the chairman of the Budget Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all. I would also like to welcome our newest employee, Heather Barker, who is our Student Services Director. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we'll be talking to you shortly.
Okay.
What we're going to do tonight is we're going to have presentations and review the budgets of food service, library and technology services, student services, maintenance, and district-wide. And it's going to be done in that order. So I would ask that Dave Dziki please come on up to the table, and Matthew might have to come up too to help him out occasionally. Carol or Andy, if you've got questions, I'll try to get to you. And if you don't, then you don't. You can just sit and listen. The liaisons for food service were myself, Brian Stisser, Carol Lang, and Chuck Mower. We met yesterday and had a very, very good meeting. Dave explained a lot of the things that were going on, and I'm going to ask, because my throat's a little on the hoarse side, I'm going to ask that David, if you would start off with your presentation
Absolutely.
of the food services for this coming year.
All right. Thank you so much, Stan. As he said, we met yesterday and we talked about the food service budget. This reflects the operating costs for the 6 schools that we sell meals at. The significant item that I have for this 2020-21 budget is the purchase of the software upgrade for the point of sale in our student meal data. This is sort of phase 2 to last year's purchase of the terminals, the hardware that we purchased for all the schools. The hardware was necessary in order to do this next upgrade. The reason why we're purchasing the software is that the current lunchbox that we do use, the operating system that is not going to be compatible ongoing after next year. So with this upgrade, it's going to help enhance reporting and communication. It integrates My Schoolbox and PowerSchool, so it'll be done in real time rather than having a delay that we have right now. And it will eliminate the servers that are in the cafeteria kitchens, the computers that we're using right now. Everything will be broadcast with the cloud, so I won't have to have any further updates on purchasing servers and doing contracts on those. The amount includes software, professional training, and setup for the upcoming school year. We are separate. We operate on a daily basis. We sell meals to all the schools, all the children in the schools, and we are self-supportive of the district. So we basically operate on our own budget. We have money that comes in that pays for all the expenses that we are in my budget for this year. There's the software upgrade is going to be a necessary function that we will need for the student meal data. Right now, it's going to be within the school district. We have the 6 schools. They all operate, and we use that for reporting for our reimbursable meals every day as well. So the upgrade is going to be necessary to keep on with that. I don't know if you have any questions on on the computer software that we have.
Does anybody have any questions on the new computer system? Yes. Andy Hudson.
I just want to make sure I understand. Did you say your budget is net neutral for the school district? You
Correct.
have all your revenue offsets your expenses? And then is that inclusive of the software as well?
Yes,
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
you're welcome.
Andy Snyder or Carol Lang, do you have anything?
No, I'll just throw out so other people know, because I was wondering about it when we had our meeting. I asked if, because we were buying the software, if we were reducing the budget because we no longer need the servers. And I was told that's sort of an in-process thing, so it'll take a while until the servers can be totally done away with, but that will be the eventual outcome.
Yes. So with that, we have the servers in place, which will have the transaction histories from Lunchbox. When they do the transition into Mosaic, the new software, they will be transferring all the student balances, all the free and reduced information. But any of the transaction history on Lunchbox will remain on Lunchbox. So that's why we will need to keep at least one of the servers, probably the main server, in function mode until we can get rid of it. But I work with Jeff in the technology department, and he helped set up the terminals last year. He's going to be in the same process of helping with the software upgrade this year. So I think we should have a easy time doing that. The good thing about Mosaic, it's based on the Lunchbox, previously software, it's based on a Lunchbox. So the transition should be seamless. I think there'll be a training session when they come. It'll be an on-site for 3 days. The first day will be just gearing up for it and make sure that all the people that will be involved, all my cashiers and servers, know exactly what's going to happen. They will make us live the next day, so everybody that has been in the first day training should see that changeover when we open up for breakfast at 7 o'clock. So there will be somebody on site. They will help with any questions that we have, and that includes the Office, the free and reduced applications, any of the reporting systems that we currently use, and I think we've been using Heartland for about the last 7 years, and I have a lot of confidence in that changeover. Any other questions?
Lee?
Good evening, thank you.
Sure.
You mentioned that you'll be retiring the servers that you're currently using.
Yes.
Is that something that could be recycled, perhaps in the through Jeff in the media,
Well, recycled as in
reused, reintegrated into?
probably not reused, because Jeff. I was talking to Jeff, and he said those things are pretty old, anyways.
Okay,
So they would probably have been needed to be replaced in a short time. So this would just be eliminating them.
understood. Thank you.
Mhm. Sure.
Can you give a quick update on how we have to price our meals based on reimbursement for free and reduced?
Sure.
Because I think that's often, every year, that tends to be something that people don't quite understand, that we need to price accordingly.
Okay. So with the USDA, there's certain regulations that we have to follow, and one of them is the paid lunch equity. So paid lunch equity basically means that our district has to have a price for the paying student that's equal or greater than what the reimbursement rates are for the free meals that we get reimbursed for. So there is, every year we have to submit an application to the Department of Education, and one of the spreadsheets that I have to fill out is the paid lunch equity. So basically it's taking, they ask for an average price that will equal that. So I can average out from K through 12 grades, as long as the price averages out to what the reimbursement rate is, I'm okay to go with that. If it falls short, then I might have to increase my prices. So last year we increased our prices 25 cents across the board, and it seems to be okay for this year. But then again, we'll have to take a look at that again in the coming years. Any other questions?
Yes, Andy Hunter.
For the free and reduced lunches, how do we communicate that opportunity to the parents? And do we feel like we're blanketing the community that everybody that may qualify for free or reduced lunches are we ensuring they're getting the opportunity to claim that opportunity?
We, every year in the packet that we send home, or any new students that come into the district, there's a packet. Included with that is a free and reduced application. We also have it on the website under the lunch program, so there's the opportunity for anybody to download that off the website and submit it to us. And anybody that receives food stamps within the state of New Hampshire, if they're enrolled in our district, there's something called direct certification. So we get notified if anybody's on food stamps, and they're automatically enrolled in free and reduced.
Okay, so we feel pretty comfortable that we're
Yes.
getting that word out?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I can also tell you, they will have, some of the teachers, if they think that a student needs food or isn't getting what they should at home, they will, refer them to the right people to find out if, in fact, maybe if they had a free lunch or free breakfast, that might help them out a lot educationally.
Quick question. I know we talked about this last year. Do you still have a situation where we had to kind of change some of what we were serving due to federal regulations about what qualifies as a fruit and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. So we're still under the federal regulations as far as what components we need to serve every day or offer every day. So we do have a protein, a grain, fruit, vegetable, and milk. But in order for the kids to have a reimbursable meal, that has to have a fruit or a vegetable included in it. And I think they're trying to they're making a few adjustments to that. They've adjusted the whole grain because everything prior to this year had to be 100% whole grain product,
That was an issue last year, I remember.
including right down to croutons and saltine crackers. So they've kind of they've rolled it back to where it's at least 50% of the products that we use have to be a whole grain product. So we've been able to change a few items that were a problem. If it could have been rice or tortilla shells or whatever it might be, that we could make the adjustment to. But a lot of the products that the purveyors have given to us, the whole grain products, have been pretty acceptable with the students.
One last time around the table and on the phones. Any further questions?
I'm all set.
You all set, Andy?
Yep, I'm good.
Chuck? I'm good. I would just like to say, David, that it's always a pleasure every year because you bring samples to the meeting. And,
But this is not an official meeting. There's no food.
yeah, no. This is the meeting I had with
All
him.
right.
The liaison
And-
meeting.
All
is-
Quite the surprise. Whole grain Cheez-Its.
Yeah, you said this last year, Stan, and I got to be honest, none of us are buying that.
Can't find them everywhere.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely incredible. You do a good job of keeping our kids fed and keeping them healthy.
I appreciate that.
And I want to personally thank you for your loyal service to the school district and to the town.
Thank you so much, Stan. I appreciate it. Sure.
Sure.
My understanding is that through a lot of the schools, there are areas where families can donate snacks to those that may need snacks or may not bring snacks to school on a regular basis. Are there any programs out there that would help schools support those programs? As I understand it now, most of it's just volunteer donations and giving that way.
Yeah. At this point, it's been volunteers helping out. But I mean, it's something that we could look at in the future. I don't know of anything off the top of my head, no. Thank you.
Go right ahead.
So my question would be, let's say a student runs out of funding on their account for like a day or two.
Sure.
Are they allowed to charge their account, and are they still provided lunch during that day?
So they're allowed to charge a reimbursable meal. Anything that's an a la carte item, we're not allowed to charge. And the reimbursable meal includes all the 5 components. They should be able to have sustainable lunch for that day and ongoing. So you're welcome.
Anybody else? Thank you, Dave.
All right, appreciate
Go home
it.
now.
Thank you.
Next up on our list is Library and Technological Services. Nancy Rose is their excellent director of a number of years and lifesaver. I'd like to welcome her. And the liaisons were Brian Stisser, Lee French, and Chuck Mower. Brian couldn't be here tonight because of a conflict. And Lee, I guess you got elected to talk about your meeting?
Good evening, Nancy. Thank you.
Hi.
In our meeting, we highlighted several items of interest in the budget this year, some of which included the server and router expenses increasing due to virtualization of the cloud, and what programs surrounded that, some of which we're implementing colo spaces at the middle school. So we're working on wrapping up that project. We expect in the next year.
Yep.
So there are expenses involved with backup of all of our information offsite. I wanted to say how impressed I was with the limited amount of funding and staffing that you have. I was overwhelmed at how much you do with the staff that you have. Essentially one person each for the pre-K through 4 person for the middle school and another for the high school. I was unaware that just how encompassing your role was through all of our school systems, not just here at the high school. So I was quite amazed at what volume you guys do. We made a note about students that don't have library cards. We talked about maybe trying to put together a program where more high school students would be more easily enrolled with the library through the high school, and what we could do to possibly make that easier for them. And then another item that I noted was that our ratio of devices to students here at the high school is about 1 device per every 4 students.
Roughly.
Yeah. And we would like to improve that ratio in the future, and try to fund some programming for that. Let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you very much,
Chuck,
Lee.
do you have anything to add to
No,
that?
I have nothing to add. Lee did a good job.
Nancy, it's all yours.
And so, going back to what we talked about at the school board presentation about the budget, my budget this year is fairly stable. It just reflects ongoing maintenance of programs and trying to keep our hardware replacement cycle where it is getting to in about the 5 to 7 year range. The software account grows every year, but that account accounts for a lot of it's everything that we use for like research. It supports a lot of the curriculum areas. It is the infrastructure, the software that runs appliances, hardware. It's our antivirus, and also this year we've had to add software to support the compliance with HB 1612, the privacy law, and also increased capabilities on the back end for data security, which is also a part of the New Hampshire law. To Lee's point, we've been working on changing our back end from buying separate servers for every separate service to more of a virtual environment so that we run multiple services on servers and we have redundancy. You mentioned the cloud, and that was actually a question that came up at the school board, and it was Andy, who's on the phone, who asked it about would we experience an increase in cost of services if we were to go to some of the applications that we use in a cloud setting or hosted. And I haven't done the numbers on that, but typically when you go to a hosted environment, it goes up because you are no longer paying for hardware that you're maintaining and the people to maintain that hardware. So you're essentially paying for a service that you used to perform. So I think it's important to note that because cloud is frequently a question that gets asked of technology people these days, and it has its pros and it has its cons. And then we did have a conversation about making sure that, the students have access to library cards, and I think it's an important thing to try to focus on. And I know that different members of the library, public library staff, have come to different open house nights to register students for cards. And the importance of that is the library licenses resources for research and also audiobooks and ebooks that we don't license because we wouldn't want to duplicate effort. But they also have the benefit of being a part of the GMILCS consortium, and their buying power is much greater than ours. And so there's things that students could have access to through that that they can't get through us. And so it's another plug for encouraging use of the public library and to get those cards. And if we could get a collaborative approach going, that would be something that would be nice. We have to be very careful about sharing student data, which is a new hat that I wear. More than I like to think, but we would have to be mindful of that. So, but otherwise, this year there's not a lot of anything that really stands out from previous years. It's just kind of continuing with services.
What's happening with bookbinding? Didn't I hear or read somewhere that some of that money got removed from your budget?
No, it's
No, it
still
didn't?
in there.
Okay.
Yeah, and we still do it. So yeah,
Just not as much.
we do less than we used to. In some cases, there's stuff that it's hard to get a hold of, or with the really, really high use Minecraft and Star Wars might surprise you. Some of those wear better after they're bound because the binding that they come with is really cheap. So we actually get more out of the book if we send them off and bind them. They last longer. So.
Okay. Any questions for Nancy? Yes, Andy Hunter.
Hi.
Hi.
Often on the news, you hear about either, cities, towns, school districts, their data was somehow locked out by a hacker and then they have to pay a large ransom to get their data back. What steps is the school district taking to ensure that we're not that victim?
So the two major systems that we run locally are PowerSchool and Infinite Visions, that they're financial and student information systems. And we do snapshots of those data sets, so that's uploaded every night. So every night a fresh data set goes off to the corporate. We do backups off of our environment. So if somebody were to get into an environment, the backups are a separate environment. We're working on co-locating, which is what Lee was talking about. We've improved the wide area network between the high school and the middle school, and we're also adding service redundancy so that we can spread more information out across the district. And then we're also looking at what we can do as far as off-site storage, whether it would be a cloud service or something that we just take off-site. But that's something that we're exploring right now. But for the most part, we're in pretty good shape as far as where we put things, and then what our most vulnerable stuff is leaves campus.
Okay, and then I think it was Lee mentioned right now we're currently at a ratio of 1 device per 4 students.
Mostly at the high school.
What would be optimal?
Well, education now tends to move towards 1 device per student, so that if at any time technology was the answer to what they wanted to work on, you would have a device available. Right now, the way that it works is we have carts of laptops Chromebooks and iPads that are available throughout the schools. Generally at the middle down to the elementaries, it's in the 2-to-1 to 3-to-1 range. The high school is a little bit more challenging because students move through classrooms. It's not predictably a set of kids in a classroom.
Right.
So it's a little bit harder to do that kind of a model. In which case a device that a student has that they take with them day to day would be a typical arrangement for that.
So is there anything in your current budget that improves that ratio?
So in the tech infrastructure account, there is a line for replacing and increasing computers, and that's what that line is used for. And so we try to add, but the challenge is that we're trying to add devices while we're also trying to reduce the replacement cycle. And so what I find is we will intend to replace something and the schools will want to hold on to it. So that becomes a support issue. But we've had, going back to the staff that Lee was talking about, I just would like to just let it be known that the staff that we have supporting our technology are stellar, and they keep stuff going. And we've invested RAM. We clean them every year. They get wiped and redone every year. So we're able to prolong the life of equipment. So I know in the elementary schools we've got laptops that they've moved out of the cart and now they're being used as backups in the classrooms for student use that are in their 6th year. And they're just a little HP 11-inch device, but they just keep plugging along. So we get a lot of life out of devices.
So if your budget stayed steady year over year, would we ever get to a point at its current funding, if it stayed steady year over year, would we ever get to a point where we're 1 device per student?
No.
So at some point, we're going to have to look at some funding in order to get to the optimal state.
And what model we would want to employ. Then that's a challenge with New Hampshire. We tend to solve our problems locally, and so every town kind of takes this on in a different way. And so that's something that the tech director group that I'm a part of, we talk about. And a lot of districts have gone before, so we have a lot of lessons learned that we can get experience from. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Chuck?
If I could ask, Mark, would you come up and join us for a moment? I think we all understand how quickly technology is advancing and how its application for education particularly is growing so quickly. I think one of the impediments, as I understand it, to one-to-one device ratios is having a consistent design across the board. And of course, we have now incorporated and embraced the universal design for learning. And yet that is still somewhat nascent. Could you speak to at what point we might be looking at a convergence of the effectiveness of UDL and the desire for implementing one-on-one devices?
So one of the strengths of our team is that we really collaborate. And so what I would tell you is I will tell you my personal thinking, but I really want to stress that no decision of that kind would be made without a lot of conversation and collaboration with Nancy, with John, and then of course with the board. I think that one thing that I've learned in in my various roles is that there's a sense sometimes that there's a single answer to the challenges that we face, and sometimes it's trendy and fad-ish, and then other times it's really research-based and practical. I think years ago, when they started to be discussed about one-on-one, some districts went right whole hog into it, and they didn't think about the consequences at all. Not least, they didn't really anticipate what the support side of that would be. But then one thing that Nancy has talked an awful lot about is, and you even heard her refer to it tonight, if technology is the thing that a student needs. Nancy is funny in that as the technology director, she'd be among the first to say that technology isn't always the answer. Sometimes, it's a different kind of tool. And so one of the things that we're really working on with our staff is to continue to try to support them to understand what is the right tool for the assignment that is that they're asked to complete, and what is the goal of that assignment. And so that is part of the initiative with UDL. So that's a long-winded way of saying that we certainly have been thinking about this for a long time, but we have not jumped on the bandwagon of one-to-one because it solves some problems, but we wouldn't want teachers or students or community to think that just having ready access to a computer is always the necessary answer. Having said that, it could certainly be and defensible to be a significant tool in the arsenal, in which case that would suggest that we'd want to have students have access to it. I guess my larger point, and I really would defer to Nancy on explicating that because she's really the expert, but my further answer is the way that we've operated in Merrimack is we really try to spend time thinking about the issue, thinking about the sides, thinking about the known knowns, the known unknowns, that kind of term, and try to figure that all in. I would just tell you that we're not sitting idly by and just letting life happen. We really are actively contemplating that and contemplating how it dovetails with our, as you point out, nascent UDL work, and really want to try to figure out if we want one-on-one, one-to-one, what would we want it for, and how could we make sure that we, maximize that as a tool. So I don't know, Nancy, if
Well, and I think I like that you mentioned universal design, because I think technology is one of the levers that can help students, and depending on their need. And something that we've talked about a lot is we don't want to just substitute what we do now with a piece of technology. We want to transform and enhance. That takes a lot of learning on both the part of the student and the educator. And that's the work that remains to be done. And so an infusion of technology is always helpful, but it can replace what we do, but it could also then be invested in to do more. And that's really the ultimate goal. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do with the UDL work, is figure out what are those tools, what are those opportunities that we can create. So that answers that.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that this is something that is under consideration and requires a long and thoughtful initiative on the part of the school board to entertain.
I would say before the school board, it's it's a long and thoughtful consideration of administration to know what we'd even be asking the school board for in that regard. I mean, I guess the takeaway that I'd like to kind of share is that I appreciate you said thoughtful consideration. I mean, that's really what we do about a lot of things. We really don't try to just jump on a bandwagon because it's the new thing. Nancy just alluded to another thing. Sometimes, we for instance have long since said that it's sometimes worksheets are a good thing and a useful tool, but they shouldn't be really the only way that we instruct students. The way that sometimes that could be interpreted is, okay, well, now I'll have a computer, and I'll have students do work on the computer, but it ends up kind of just being a worksheet on a computer, and yet you've sort of satisfied yourself by saying, well, now we're using technology. But really, you're using technology for the same old purpose that you did before, only now it's on a computer instead of in a handout. But the bigger point is, what's the meaningful activity and what's the meaningful learning goal? So that's the kind of thing that we're really doing a lot of work with our teachers around, and trying to prevent the wholesale adoption of a new technology and think that just because you're using it means you're using it appropriately or correctly, or that it's achieving the purpose for which it was intended. So a lot of times, the flashy object seems to be the right thing to do, and sometimes you can use a flashy object in a very old-fashioned, outdated way. So that's the kind of thinking that we're really trying to do at our leadership table, at trainings with teachers. Over the last number of years, we've made great progress with our teachers around those issues. And so I feel confident that we're getting to a point where we would have something to be able to share with the school board in terms of what we would propose, and then allow that deliberation to happen with them, and it would be on us to make a good case.
Well, I, for one, am very happy to see a full embrace of UDL. And I know that that will lead to a better answer about the number of devices that we should appropriately provide for students.
Thank you.
All right.
I just have a quick question for you, Mark. For schools that do have those one-on-one devices, do you guys look at what other schools who do already have that in place, how they've used that to help their students, and do they have like stats per se on whether or not that's been successful in their schools and if that's helped overall the student and the way that they learn?
So I appreciate that question, and I really am going to turn to my colleague because I know that Nancy works so intimately with her colleagues across the state. So I don't know if you have an answer to that, but you would have a better answer than I for that.
So we talk a lot about that. There's a new group, it's probably about 3 or 4 years old now, and it's the tech directors from school districts all across the state. And the challenge is, what do you measure as far as success? So I don't know that there's been a statewide study according to like what causes there to be success. I know there's some research that's done. Last year, I employed the AP English students that were seniors to do research on one-to-one programs, and they looked at results, and they found through research, more than just anecdotally here in the state, that it does tend to improve performance when it's used with fidelity. If it's used to replace worksheets, then you don't really get a gain because you're not getting new learning. You're not getting a good experience. So when it's used with fidelity and when they can really engage with each other, when it can increase collaboration, when they have opportunities to really inquire and think deeply, it does improve results in different ways. It might be standardized tests. It might be how they do as far as as writers. But again, it goes back to how it's implemented and how well it's done. And there's a lot of talk about what device is appropriate and all of that, but that really comes down to what do you want them to be able to do. So there's no quick fix or one answer for how you go about doing it. But so yeah, I think it comes back to what it is that you want to measure and then how well you implement it against that measurement. So it doesn't really answer your question, but it kind of gets at how challenging it is to know. But if it increases engagement and a student that wasn't engaged becomes engaged, that's a success. So that's the opportunity. And I think going back to Chuck's mention of UDL, for some students, that may be a piece that helps them. For another student, they may prefer paper, and that needs to be honored. So it can go many ways. Yes.
Lee.
I have one final question for you. With the cost of technology, laptops, mobile devices coming down over recent years, are you seeing more and more students bringing their own into the classrooms? And how is that managed on your end? Is that an issue if students bring their own?
No, if they bring their devices in, they use the network that is essentially isolated to internet use. The management of that really lands on the instructor, what the teachers want to have them do. Many kids have a laptop and a phone. So in different ways, they might leverage, a teacher might leverage the phone that students have on them for like polling and quick research and stuff like that. And our environment supports them bringing those devices in. That's an area that we've looked at beefing up, how we manage that. We haven't done that just yet. It's kind of a moving target. And I wouldn't want to invest a ton in BYOD support and then we end up getting more devices that we then have the need to control too. So that's an area that we allow them, but what they can do is very limited, and so it's okay for them to come in. So
You are seeing an increase in that, I would presume?
Yeah, anecdotally,
Over-
yeah.
over
You just
time.
see more kids that have a device and they might have a laptop in their backpack and they can sit down and use that and do word processing and probably also play games and watch movies and whatever it is that they're not supposed to do. But that's part of learning how to be a responsible user of technology and understanding what's appropriate and where. But it tends to get managed in the classroom setting.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else? Thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Gonna try. Next up on our list is Student Services with the new Director of Student Services, Heather Barker. First of all, welcome. The liaisons were Jordan, Mackenzie, and Andy Hunter. I don't know if I got to explain to you or not. Do you want to do your presentation first or have the liaison do it first?
We discussed this. We planned this out.
Yeah,
She's all up to speed. We're ready to roll.
I even got a visual.
I drew a picture of how the meeting works.
Okay.
So we got together yesterday to go over the student services budget, which essentially is flat for all intents and purposes. The increase of I want to say about 400,000 or so is really a 2.8% increase, and it's am I too loud? What happened? You turn me down? The increase, about 2.8%, is due to contractual salary increases for paraprofessionals and support staff, as well as a 3.5% increase for transportation. That's really where the increase is in this budget. And one of the things that Heather is trying to do is not necessarily look at a need and say, well, we need a budget for that and spend more money. Rather, take a look at the needs, and you really are dealing with different needs every year based on the students in the district and who we have. But taking a look at that and then reassigning or redeploying individuals, aligning them better with which students need what services and which schools at what grade level. So, kudos to Heather. The solution is not just hire more people. It's taking a look at who we have and where they can be used. They had planned in this department for about 663 students to be involved in some capacity with an IEP. They're actually servicing about 20 more than that. They're up to about 685 students. Some of these students, they may have an hour or two a week of speech or language with a specialist. Others, obviously, it's a more complex situation. Certainly, this is a department where they do need to adhere to national guidelines, federal and state laws, and it really comes down to a couple things. One is making sure that all students, regardless of their needs and their physical ability, one of the underlying tenets of this department is everyone is entitled to a free and public education. The other is to make sure that happens in a least restrictive environment, meaning the answer is not just to take a student out of their classroom with their peers and drop them somewhere else by themselves or in a different school, but really to find a way to educate them in the traditional classroom setting. Not only is this better for development and education, but it also saves money by keeping students within their classroom, within their school. It's interesting to note that about 10 or 11 years ago, we had about 50 to 70 students, depending on the year, that were placed out of district. And that number has come down to between about 20 and 30. So this belief that, people move to Merrimack because they're going to get, a lot of money spent on special ed, that's kind of, it doesn't have a lot of bearing based on what we learned the other day. We want to spend money on prevention, because if you do that early on, it's going to help students, and B, it's going to be it's going to be a savings for the district. And so some of the effort has been put into that early prevention, early intervention. And so we've got a very strong ratio right now of aides to students when you look at the preschool age group. I think we said it was almost at like 5-to-1 with the amount of kind of support. And what's happening right now is those students go off to kindergarten and they go from a situation where it may have been, a half dozen students to a paraprofessional or a teacher, where all of a sudden it could be as much as 40-to-1. And so what we're finding is, we've put a lot of effort into that early diagnosis, but if we don't, if we're not able to do something at that age, all of a sudden we find that you go from, being a young student and now you had a 5-to-1 ratio and now it's 40-to-1. And so that then uncovers other kinds of problems that need to get handled. I think that's a pretty good overview. Right now, Merrimack is pretty much in line across the state as far as the number of students that have been identified. If you exclude the preschool students, you're looking at about 15.6%. If you include preschool and the high school and everything, again, you're in that 16 to 17% range. So we're pretty much in line. And there are, I should mention, for those that are not familiar, this is a department where there are thresholds as far as what the town has to spend for students that need extraordinary, placement or services. So there is, it's been called a couple different things. Matt, you could correct me, but I know at one point it was called catastrophic aid. But if the demands upon the district are so high for a particular student with particular needs, the state does kick in money to help with that. I think I'll throw it over to you.
That was impressive. Thank you. I actually would be wide open for questions if you'd like to do that. I can also give you a lot more information, but he very succinctly laid out our hour and a half meeting yesterday morning.
If you would like to give some additional information, by all means.
Sure. So I came in this summer in July, very curious. I'm very impressed with the array of special education services and what I called early intervening services. Here we're using the term RTI because often special educators are delivering services to students as part of school programs or related service providers or in schools, offering what we call response to intervention, which the concept there is if we can intervene early with students, provide them with specialized direct instruction in small groups, giving them more and supplementing what's happening in the classroom, we can keep the gap from growing so that students don't end up with giant gaps that need a lot of very specialized services and instruction and time out of the classroom perhaps. So I was very impressed with that. I also came as the district launched the Universal Design for Learning across the entire district. It is a wonderful time to be part of that in terms of special education, because as the district rises in deepening their understanding and learning about that and the application of that framework and the practices that go along with that at the universal level or general ed classroom level, that will support students who potentially would have required more intensive supports and needs, special education, time out of classrooms. That's going to support this, along with as that technology comes in and kids are taught in ways that are more aligned with their learning style. They have access to choice and ways to engage them in different ways, and teachers are thinking about how we teach differently. That's also going to support special education. So there is a lot happening in Merrimack School District that is happening at the general education level or beginning to happen there that's going to support what happens in special ed. So over time, one might expect, if you look at research on this, that over time, you're talking like 3 to 5 years implementing some big initiative like that, because it's similar to technology. you're transitioning the workforce, you have to build the capacity in the educators as well as the learners. So as that process happens and unfolds, in places where this is fully implemented, you see a reduction in discipline and behavior problems. You see a reduction in the number of students referred. You see a reduction in the kinds or extensive nature of some of the supports, aids, and services that we need to implement in a more traditional general ed classroom setting. So, for example, in our district, you might see a reduction in some of the one-on-one or small group aids for students that don't have severe disabilities. That is a way that schools and classrooms now are able to include kids in general ed settings by having more people. So, for example, when we talked about the preschool, you could look at the preschool actually as an intervention. So all of the students who attend that have access to a teacher. There are special ed aides that are part of the program. There is speech and language, there's occupational therapy, there's physical therapy. So whether or not a student has a disability, they're going to benefit from those supports that are in that placement, in that setting. So in that setting, we were talking about if you have classrooms of 15, 16 students, and you have that array of adults, you're talking about a 1-to-5 ratio potentially for kids. And the smaller the ratio, meaning the smaller the number of students to the adults, the better for kids. The more direct and aligned instruction can be, the more responsive we can be in offering kids in the moment supports. We actually talked about moving into kindergarten has been an interesting challenge. So this was also an interesting time for me to come in. We're a year into full day kindergarten, and there were some really significant challenges in the lower elementary this year in trying to figure out how to support kids across the board in terms of coming in developmentally, readiness levels, and really thinking about that because I had spent a lot of times looking at just doing a data dive of all of the resources in the district serving special education. And I really was feeling like, wow, there is a lot of resources here. We really need to be looking at how we're using them. We need to align them, develop some coherence and systems across the district, regardless of the level and building. But when I really started looking at that kindergarten piece, one of the things that became really obvious to me, and I know it became obvious to Mark and John and the other administrators, we've talked about it, is that part of what has happened is students go from this very supported environment to a classroom with 18 to 21 or 22 students. And I was thinking, because I didn't know that, oh, well, there's KIAs, there are these kindergarten instructional aides. I didn't realize that there was a half of aide per classroom. So really, when you think about that, that's where Jordan's referencing that 40 to 1, because it could be 2 classrooms with 1 aide moving between the rooms and then 2 teachers. So things like that are things I'm paying attention to, and how can we support the different levels, in particular that early intervention, like thinking about preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, that lower L, so that kids are moving up into the system and needing less later. So thinking in terms of that piece. So that's been a big focus. I am still learning every day, and I'm very grateful to be here.
Okay. Questions? Go ahead.
All right, so I have 2 questions to start out with.
Sure.
So for families that move into town that might have their child is not placed in the town schools, do you guys have to take over that cost for the out-of-district placement if they move here into town? That's my first question. And then my second question is, have you seen any of the lower elementary schools or any of our Merrimack schools, for instance, need more paraeducator support? Have they asked for it, and how, without having to hire more staff, how have you served that request?
Sure. So to answer the first question, let me see if I'm understanding this. So if a family moves into town and they have a student with a severe disability and that student's already placed out of district in a special ed setting, yes, we would assume the cost of that placement. So if a family moved in and their child was placed in a special education school, we would obviously assume the cost of that. One of the things that would happen is we would hold an IEP team meeting after a period of time And we would go and take a look at to see, is that the least restrictive environment? Do we have different programs that may not have been available in the other school district that we could look at in a way to return the student to a less restrictive setting? If the answer was yes, we would work with the family to move, and that placement to move the student back to a less restrictive setting, because sometimes school districts don't have as many resources, and that is ultimately the only option. There are other cases where the student is absolutely in the least restrictive setting, and we would have that student remain in that setting and assume the responsibility of the cost. Thinking kind of along that lines, if students move in or are in our community and choose charter schools, we as a public school, that is considered a public school and under state law and federal rules, we would be responsible for the special education of those students in the charter school. So if a student had an IEP or the team there felt that the student may have some underlying educational disability, we would send a special ed team out to do the evaluations, to go through the whole special ed process. And if the student met the determination criteria laid out in the federal rules and state rules, we would identify the student, write an IEP, and we would be responsible for the services. We talked about that the other day. That's less than 1% of the students in Merrimack. So we're not talking about a large group of students. The other case that's similar would be students who are placed, and there are many of those in the area, in private school settings. We would be responsible for the special education process because in the United States we have zero reject, which means every kid is entitled to an education, and it's our job to make sure that we find kids who may need special education. We would send out a team to the private school. We would go through the same process. If it was determined by the special ed team there with the family that that student met eligibility rules, we would identify the student. The school would offer a placement in the school district because we are not responsible for the provision of services in a private placement. And the family could move their student to the public school for special education. Some have done that. Other families choose to opt out and decline the special education while their student is placed there. So those are sort of three other options that kind of play out, and we talked a little bit about them. The second question was about paraprofessionals. So when I came here, I was really curious, and I spent my first couple weeks really digging into the data to help sort of build my background knowledge of where are the schools, how are the schools configured, what makes up the schools, are they similar, are they different? So one of the things that I did is I created a big demographic board in my office, and I looked at that a lot, and I have contemplated, and I had some questions. I wondered myself, why does it look different in different places? Like, how are aids allocated, and how do we use those resources here? And at the same time, there was a situation at one of our lower elementary schools where a student, actually a few students have moved into that school, over 2 in the summer and 1 in the early fall, who needed additional supports. And as I had said to Jordan and Mackenzie and Andy yesterday, I was feeling like, wow, we have a lot of paraprofessionals in Merrimack. They are all embedded in IEPs, but we have a lot of paraprofessionals. How are we using those? How are we allocating those resources? So I challenged our administrative team that I would be looking for us to examine how we're doing that, what we're using them for, how does that play out in each building, and is there consistency across the district? I don't have all those answers. That's work I'm still doing. But I challenged us as a district to come together as a district to take a look at when a school in the district has a situation like they had in the one school in the lower L, could we look in other schools to see, are all those resources currently allocated? Are they linked to students that they can't be moved from? Are there ways we could look at that? So we, for the first time that I know of here, we moved 2 paraprofessionals, one from the middle school and one from another lower elementary school, to the other school because that school needed those resources this year. And that was sort of a signal from me to the special ed team and the administrative team in our schools that these are shared resources. We're sort of in this all together as a big system, as a district, and that we would support one another as those arose. So long-winded answers, but I am closely looking at that, and we have not increased the allocation of paraprofessionals. We've been able to meet the increased need by reallocating resources we had here.
Any other questions? Andy?
Yeah.
May I just add one thing to what Director Barker was just saying, and she answered that beautifully, and I just want to reiterate the importance, and she's alluded to it, I just want to reiterate the importance of the fact that in Merrimack, we have teams. Well, in all districts, you have teams, and those teams determine a need. And that need is entirely based on the individual student and what the individual student's needs are. And those are unpredictable things. Not only are they unpredictable from year to year, they're sometimes unpredictable from day to day. And so it's just very important to note that when we're talking about support staff and in the context of special education, that Merrimack does no more and no less than what it needs to do based on the needs of the students as they present. And we're duty bound to do that, both legally and probably as a moral issue. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but I would say for the perspective of resources, what we're legally required to do. And so what Heather is just, she said it beautifully, but I just wanted to make sure that the point was established, that what she's talking about is a way to continue to view these resources as district resources and not a building's resources, because the needs of the district change from potentially day to day, month to month, and certainly year to year based on how the developmental progress of students and what changes occur in their lives, both developmentally, cognitively, and then physically as well. So just an important point. She certainly said it. I just wanted to really drive that point home.
Thank you.
Heather,
Yes.
could you explain for the people that may be watching this at home what the distinction is between an IEP and a 504?
Sure. So within the general ed classroom, you have all of the students. Within that group, there will be a subset of students who have some kind of disability that would require us to consider accommodations and modifications for them. And the purpose of that would be to engage in non-discriminatory practice. In other words, we want to level the playing field and take away the barriers that would be created by said disability. Could be as simple as a peanut allergy and having access to peanut-free tables, bee allergies and having access to the medication and tools that students need and having trained adults. Those would be things that one might find in a 504 plan. So reasonable accommodations that would support the students so they can have full access to education and all of the other parts, extracurricular, co-curricular, all of the pieces of school. Within that group, so that's a protected class, right? Those are people with disabilities and want to engage in non-discriminatory practice. Within that group are students who are protected under IDEA. So those are students who have educational disabilities, who require specialized instruction. So like a 504 plan, an IEP would include accommodations and modifications that are embedded there purposefully to level the playing field and provide that student with full access to experiences that are enjoyed by all students in school. Additionally, an IEP is very specific and unique to that student, and it would include, which is why it makes it an IEP versus a 504 plan, it includes IEP goals and IEP objectives and benchmarks, right? And a progress monitoring system that is very mandated and very specific and procedural and designed for the unique needs of that student, is specialized instruction that that student would not have access to in the regular education program. For example, a student who is reading 3 or 4 years below grade level would need accommodations in the general ed classroom if they were in 4th or 5th grade. So they would have access to the same learning and concepts. So the teacher might make accommodations like having it read to them, having technology that's giving it to them, having the student be able to use software that is speech to text or things like that. So those are accommodations. Additionally, that student's IEP may have an IEP goal, it would, if the student had a reading disability, where the student is receiving direct instruction, which if everybody's in 4th grade, they're getting 4th grade instruction. This student might be receiving 1st grade instruction that includes phonemic awareness. It might have fluency goals, comprehension goals, but it's the just right instruction that that student needs right now. So that's the big difference between those two.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Anybody else?
So to follow Mark's comments, I absolutely agree. We have a moral obligation. We have a legal obligation. We also have an obligation to the taxpayers to make sure we're employing those resources efficiently. And so looking across the district, I think that absolutely satisfies that goal. And I was happy to hear that is the course that the administration is taking. I want to talk a little bit about this potential staff increase to the school. We're talking about adding a few teachers to keep the teacher to student ratio low. How does that play into student services? How does that affect your potential future budget?
Do you mean like, okay,
So I'm talking
like
in terms of intervention.
Sure.
Early
Okay.
intervention.
Yeah. So so that was interesting because that was the fall here. There were a lot of challenges. There were many referrals into special education right away around kindergartners, some of whom were in our preschool, who looked different in the full day program. So there's a lot of factors that can come to play. The longer day, right? They may not developmentally quite ready for some of the more academic parts of a classroom. It's different than the more play-based centers that are happening in preschool. But beyond that, one of the real indicators, and there's a lot of research and literature out there about this, is when you have larger class sizes, right? Students may in fact fall into special education because the system itself is disabling in a funny way. Like the student who the gap is small initially in reading, they may not stand out right away. They may need some more. They're in a large group. The teacher's trying to manage a lot of behavior. A lot of different things are happening, and you have one person there with 20, 25. Well, I'm not exactly even sure, but I knew right away when we were looking at the kindergarten, there was a dramatic increase in referrals, for example. When you go through that process, that's hours of work where those people who have time that they would be in classroom supporting kids, doing direct instruction, they still do all those things, but additionally, they're doing evaluations, writing reports, doing those pieces, which we want them to do that when we want to determine whether a child has that disability. But the number was higher than it's been in years past. And there was a lot of not quantitative data, but qualitative data from teachers and the related service providers that things felt different. It felt like kids were struggling more. So that was one of the things we were thinking, like, wow, you go from like a 1-to-5 ratio, and I'm not suggesting it has to be that low, but you go from that to really a lot of your instructional time is 1-to-18, 1-to-20, 1-to-21, and then sometime there's an 8 in there. So that feels different. And so what ends up happening, and that did happen, is some of those schools, those paraprofessionals, if you look, for example, in the lower L, the paraprofessionals run between 20 and 23.5, and it is higher at Reed's Ferry because they do have a program that's housed there for preschool, which has a lot of paraprofessionals one-on-one, and we need those. Those are for very intensive needs, students with intensive needs. And they additionally have a lower elementary program. So there is a differential there, which made sense once I really looked at it and understood it. But when you looked at those number of aides, what happened is it put a tremendous pressure on the system because the paraprofessionals who were parsed out in other places in the building now had to come down into kindergarten to support a subset of students who really needed, based on their behavior and their inability to sort of meet things where they were at. They had some lagging skills. They needed those paraprofessionals. So that placed pressure on some of the other grade levels. Were they able to cover that, the paraprofessional hours? Yes. But where they may have enjoyed previously the ability to move people around and have some more flexibility, it was much more rigid in the beginning of the year. So yes, when you have higher class sizes, there's a natural thing that starts to happen where it pushes things into special education because kids start to look worse. The kids who may be sort of borderline or at risk start to fall into that because the gap gets bigger. So yes, we talked a little bit about that.
So if I could summarize, would it be fair to say an investment in increased staff to keep student to teacher ratio low could potentially pay dividends in student services in the future?
Absolutely. Yes, because if you think about it, when we talked about it yesterday, all of the increase in terms of personnel, we didn't add programs, we didn't buy things, none of those things happen. It's in the personnel. So the budget is really about people serving kids and the related service providers serving students. So if you have a way to improve what's happening in the general ed side, you will keep the percentage of students who are identified down. In our district, we're right in the range of the state average. You know, some districts are lower, some are higher. If you have a fully implemented universal design for learning framework in a district over time, and there is data on that. We were at a conference on Friday, and in Massachusetts, they were sharing some data with district leadership groups that definitely shows that when that is in place, so when you have a really healthy, strong universal system with a lot of preventative pieces in place that are going to support all students, including students with disabilities, you don't need to buy more paraprofessionals or other things like that to support kids so they can be there, because it's that delicate balancing act between the least restrictive environment and making sure we're meeting the individual needs and that student is experiencing that meaningful educational benefit. It's a fine line and you're dancing it all the time.
Okay. And then my last question, I believe your total budget was 12 million, just under 13 million off the top of my head.
Yeah, like 12.6.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so you currently have 685 students.
Yep.
So is that 12 million spent on just that 685 students?
Absolutely not. So what's really interesting and very powerful is that the previous special ed director and the administration and the district leadership over the past 10 years, I think the most telling thing we talked about yesterday was the reduction, and that also shows health in a system. So if you look at the things that you would want to monitor as data points are the percent of kids that are identified in the district. Where does that align with the rest of the state? You look at referrals, what does that look like? How are we doing with things like that? This is another really good piece of information, is the number of kids that are in out-of-district placements. When I dug into that in preparation for the budget, I saw that 10, 11 years ago, they had between 70 and 90 students in out-of-district placements. Those are extremely expensive. Over the 10-year period, this district invested in things like the YES program. It can serve up to 55 students. It's an expensive program. It can serve up to 55 students, half of which have educational disabilities. The other half are at-risk kids. So within that group, if 4 or 5 students, if we didn't have that, that pays for itself, because if 3, 4 kids ended up out of district or out of that at-risk group, they end up in the special ed system, you're spending money on the other side of this. But it benefits many more children on the general ed side. Other places, examples, is the Universal Design for Learning. We have special ed folks at the high school. They have a comprehensive model. The middle school has some elements of that, and that's something that would be very interesting to look at in the lower L2, where special education people are providing early intervening services. So you're allowed to use up to a certain percentage of special ed money to support kids before they end up in that pre-referral, before special education, those programs that are in place in the schools. So for example, in the high school, a student in some districts, you have to have an IEP to go to a classroom to get supportive instruction, reinforced instruction, pre-teaching, reteaching, coaching, help, organizational support. In Merrimack School District, if you're in the high school and you need that, any student can access those supports. So there is money spent on the special ed side in support of the general education side, and that will pay off in dividends. It already has by this district's reduction from 70 plus kids to it runs between 25 and the low 30s in a given year, because what Mark said is absolutely true. At the end of the day, we are bound to provide the special education that a student needs, that a team has convened and determined that has to be in place. So that's a great question.
You service much more than 685
We
students
surely
that have been
do.
identified.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
For people at home, the YES program, a lot of them might not know what that is. Can you just explain what that is and what the population of students who they work with is?
Sure. So this is a program that in the state of New Hampshire, it came out in the early 2000s. It was after there had been a revision of IDEA that included a no more than 10-day suspension rule. You saw a rise in alternative school settings. This program was part of a comprehensive program in the state supporting kids who potentially or were involved with the court system. So youth who were at risk, potentially would be socially maladjusted or engage in delinquent behavior, right? So there are lots of students with educational disabilities, and by the nature of the disability, as those students get older, they engage in behavior because they're struggling academically, social emotionally, or behaviorally. So there's a lot of reasons why it could be happening, and those students are disproportionately represented in the court systems. We know that, right? So the YES program was originally funded through the state in the 2000s, where I worked previously. We worked with them. So what that program does, and Merrimack kept it. So lots of districts, when the money went away, the program went away. Not here. That in fact it expanded so that it's from your upper elementary through the high school. There are YES providers. So we work with this organization, and what they do is the school team, the administration, the guidance, school psychologists, whoever in the school team who's working on their student intervention teams makes a referral to my office. Those students are kids who could be not wanting to come to school. So in the upper elementary, kids who are starting to refuse to come to school, they don't want to come to school anymore. They're struggling to get work done. So they're at risk for potentially falling into trouble later, which becomes expensive, costly. So those people might go out to the home, develop a relationship with the family, help the family get supports in the community, help the family come into the school and come to team meetings, work directly with the student, be at the school, meet with the teachers, find out what the work is that the student's missing, help the student get the work done in the community, spend time with that child outside of school, developing a relationship so that you can be a liaison between the family, the child, the school, the teachers, to have a better outcome when we know these children are at risk. So that's what that program does, and it's impressive.
Anybody else? Andy, Carol?
I'm all
Good,
set.
Ken. Yep, I'm good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, maintenance. Liaisons for maintenance was myself, Carol Lang, Gillian, and Lee French. Tom, take it away.
I'd like to start off by thank you for having me to the informational meeting that we're having. I'd like to start off, there's three major significant parts of my budget items that aren't normally in there, but this year they are. One is a replacement of coral risers for the high school. The existing ones are 41 years old and have lived past their useful life. The impact on the schools, that question would probably be better directed right to the principal. And we've talked about that, especially at our liaison meeting. Another item in here has to do with pressure relief valves on boilers, which is one of those things that happen. There's a program, well, our insurer, every 2 years comes around and inspects all the schools. When they look at all the schools, they look at every part of the boilers and stuff like that. And what they did is during our inspections, we found that all our pressure relief valves are over 10 years old. They recommend for us to replace them at that point. During our conversations, they ended up being a little pricey. It's roughly $13,000 that we're asking for in our budget. They informed me that it would be a good item to budget for, which I agreed, and that's why it's sitting in our budget now. So they are replaced within their cycle, and we're sure they'll work when they're supposed to. Another item that's in there is at the middle school, and it has to do with drainage issues that we've had there for quite a while. We've done a number of things up there. We've also consulted with an engineer, and he feels could be many steps, but the first step we should take is probably putting in a drainage that would take away or extract the water before it reaches the field. That cost is in here. As I said, that's only the first step, but we feel it's prudent to do this step by step and not rush in, because sometimes the first step might be enough. So we wouldn't want to incur costs if we don't have to. So first step of that remediation would be sitting in the budget for $75,000. Those are my main items, and I'm interested in any questions you might have.
Well, first, Lee, you want to give any thoughts on the meeting that you were at?
Thank you, Tom, for taking the time to walk us through the budget. Some other things that were mentioned in the budget were the windows here at the high school. We were fortunate enough to take a tour this evening prior to the meeting and look at the current condition that they're in, many of which seem to no longer be able to lock on their own or stay locked. And as such, you've done a great job in at least creating a system that will keep them closed and safe. So I'd like to hear more thoughts about what those windows are, and what the plan is moving forward to potentially replace those.
Well, what we have is, as everyone knows, in Merrimack, we're a series of additions. That addition or those windows are 50 years old. The way they lock most time that we're most secure is with a stick. They do lock with a stick, and that's just how it works. It's been that way for a number of years now. Do they need to be fixed and it would improve? Absolutely. Is it something that I'm sure that it's always weighs on the school board, weighs on you? When do we spend the money to do it? At this point, as you saw during our walk around, that it's at the point where it really does need to be done. Is it critical to next year if we don't do it? No, but we would be adding an additional, maybe an additional stick, an additional window. But that's kind of
Or
where
two.
we are in all likelihood, you know?
Can you just explain what you mean by, you mean like the old fashioned, like putting a piece of wood to prevent someone from the outside trying to open up a window?
Precisely.
Yes,
So
exactly.
for people that need a little bit of, description, it's a
They
poor man's
close.
lock.
They close, but they just don't always secure. And some secure times. In some windows, we're actually missing pieces too.
So I'm
The lots
glad,
themselves.
yeah, I'm glad Tom's talking about the windows tonight, because if you look at your cut list, they've been removed from his budget. But,
We don't need windows, is that?
no, the board made a cut. They cut the $265,000 from his operating budget, and they placed it in a warrant article, which you'll be seeing at your next meeting. So they're still there, they're just not in his operating budget. So any questions you have on the windows, well, Tom is here, ask away, because we'll be talking about that next time we meet. But yes, he does use a piece of wood, finely honed and stained and everything like
The
that.
2x4 from Reed's
Where-
Ferry lumber.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
Sanded so there are no splinters.
Right.
And that 265,000 is not a one-time fix-it-all in the budget item, correct? That's we're gonna do as much as we can with that amount of money, because it's hard to nail down the finite cost of the placement due to potential abatement of asbestos.
Correct, correct. The original plan was doing, when we first thought about it, there's roughly 52 windows in that section. That would be the interior and the exterior in E. And now we're probably thinking that we're going to complete approximately 26. Obviously, if it works out to be a little more economically friendly, we'll do as many as we can. If we can't, we'll do a little bit less, but we're going to use this first chunk to really find out where we are as far as budget-wise.
Curiously, what might that cost be to just determine whether or not asbestos is in the window?
I would say that it's probably a $3,000 test. It's going to happen either way, but that would give us more of an idea. But then yet, we haven't really have it defined because we haven't put it out for bid.
Sure.
So the first thing is, as we've seen before with Matt, when we were doing other projects, sometimes you can do a project that's $265,000 and there could be a difference of $70,000 from one bid to the other. So it's really looking at it as far as what we think we can do, and putting it out for bid is the final number.
Yeah, and we probably do both of those. Once we have a firm that we deal with that does all our testing for us. It's been consistent over the years that we have worked with them. They're a partner of ours. It's called RPF Environmental Services. They're very well known in the state and everything like that. And as far as the Department of Environmental Services also up in Concord. So what we would do is have them come down, test all the areas where we think we're going to replace. It's actually the caulking, Tom.
We believe it's just the caulking.
Yeah, we believe it's just the caulking, but we don't know. Because you're thinking windows, and how could windows have asbestos in them? So it is the caulking that seals the windows. Back in the day in 1970, or whenever these things were put in, you know, everything had a little bit of asbestos because it was the wonder material. It never wore out. You could put it on a floor, it would last forever. And then we found out that when it becomes friable, when it gets in the air, it can cause cancer. Not a good thing. So the caulking in the window is not friable.
That's correct.
Yeah, because Tom has looked at every little bit of asbestos that may or may not be in the district. We went through a program for 10 or 15 years where we replaced all the flooring. In fact, we replaced the flooring here because this used to be an asbestos floor and it's not anymore. So we'll find out how many have asbestos. If they all do, then we'll put it out to bid to see for the asbestos removal, because that'd be a separate contract. And then we'd look at the replacement of the windows afterwards as a separate contract. But it'll give us a better idea of what we can do. And, you know, basically that'll be in a warrant article for the people to vote on. So.
Okay.
That's it.
Good.
That's
Thank you. I just wanted people to understand that this is a bit of a moving target here. There's no set price that we can nail down at this time.
Correct.
Thank you.
Keep going.
Oh, I'm good. I'm
You're good.
questions.
Andy's got a question.
Andy's got a question? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, real quick, I have a couple questions, but on the windows. And this is more for the administration. I know we're looking at potentially doing a master plan, but if this particular warrant article may or may not be enough to complete the project, does it make sense to maybe wait to do these windows until we do the master plan? Assuming there's going to be a project that comes out of the master plan, maybe combine that with the outcome of the master plan and go do that entire project at one time for the high school versus asking the taxpayers to approve a warrant article of $250,000 this year and then potentially coming back the next year and asking them for the remainder of the balance. And I think there's also in the capital improvement plan, there's some other windows year after year in there. And so I guess my question is does it make financial sense to piecemeal this year by year or maybe hold off and look at this as part of the master plan?
Andy, it makes it affordable. And the master plan that has been proposed is not dealing with the construction of windows in the high school. It's dealing out in this front parking area, road area, where the blue and green buildings are. And that's what that master plan would be doing.
So
It wouldn't be part of this.
So I think at the school board, we discussed that master plan was also gonna look at the front of the high school, the lighting, the traffic flow, more so than just the superintendent and the student services building, but it was gonna look at the project as a whole. And I guess my question is, does it make sense to include this as part of that project as a whole? Because obviously, the project that comes out of the master plan, we're gonna have to go get debt in order to complete whatever that project is. That's not going to be a 1 year, ask the taxpayers and be done. So my question, does it make sense to include this in there and finance this over time, or go back to the taxpayers year after year and ask for, $260-some thousand, and then maybe potentially next year and so forth?
Dan, can I throw in a comment?
Go ahead, Carol.
Can I get the administration to answer my question first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, and then I'll come in after.
Okay.
I just want to say the window replacement has virtually nothing to do with the master plan. Totally separate project. So if we want to do that now, we can do that now.
I understand
The master
it's-
plan.
I understand it's separate, but my question is, does it make sense to include that scope of work when we're considering the outcome of the master plan?
I'd like to see what the master plan, we're going to have to do this eventually. These windows are old, they need to be replaced. So to spread that out over a couple of years, that seemed reasonable to us. If the public doesn't think it's reasonable, they'll vote it down. But the master plan is to look at the front of the high school, it is to provide an engineering design, is because we're gonna have to be repaving that parking lot in the future. We've heard complaints about lighting. We don't wanna go forward and put lighting in spots where it doesn't need to be and then have to take it all up when we're repaving the parking lot. So the master plan really doesn't have anything to do with this. As far as financing this as part of a larger plan, I don't know what the scope of the master plan is gonna be. It may say demolish this building, that building, create this island, move traffic flow over here. It may cost a lot of money that maybe we don't want to bond. Maybe we want to do incrementally over the years as opposed to going into debt.
That's exactly. We don't know what the scope of the master plan.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm saying is, does it make sense to hold off doing this until we see the outcome of the master plan and then make a decision? Do we go bond and do all of this at one time and finance it over time versus going to the taxpayers every year and saying, can we, do another warrant article for $200 and some odd thousand and go ask for this every year?
So I'd
that's my question.
Yeah,
And-
no.
And maybe there's not a definitive answer to that, but
There,
No, I
there
think
is
it's
a-
a, well,
yeah.
if I could just say, I think it's a fair question. So if I could just break it down into two ways. If your question is, could it be? Absolutely, it could be. I'd like to just sort of elaborate on what Matt said is in terms of why it wasn't originally included, which also doesn't mean it couldn't be included. The reason it wasn't contemplated is because as Stan said, it's the original conception of the master plan was really had more to do with the disposition, if you will, of the greenhouse and the blue house, Brentwood, parking, lighting, traffic flow. And to the extent that that included anything to do with the facing of the high school, this part, that all seemed like a piece. And so that's why, in my mind, and I'll take ultimate, responsibility for that, it seemed like it didn't even occur to me. It seemed like an entirely separate enterprise. However, you're talking now about contemplating including a capital project in that. The question that I would just say we need to be clear about is, so as not to dilute, kind of the intent of the master plan, because theoretically we could include other, projects as well. And then the question would be, well, what are we really sort of, planning for? So doesn't mean it can't be, and I think you raise an interesting point. That's just the reason that it wasn't initially. The only other thing that I would say is that, and again, I hear completely the question raised about going back to the taxpayer time and again. The history of Merrimack for years has been to try to sort of have plans for the phase-in of certain projects. And so, for instance, you'll note that we don't do every paving project that we need to do. I mean, because if we could literally have done a lot more at once than we've done. But what the board has been consistent about for years is trying to kind of have a somewhat stable impact on tax rates and not spikes and dips and spikes and dips. And it also seems that, we have been able to kind of forecast what's the biggest problem and then what are problems in outlying years, so that we haven't, on the other hand, asked the taxpayer for a huge outlay all at once. So that's just been a tradition in Merrimack, and this being, the year that I've taken responsibility for putting a budget together, I wanted to maintain that tradition, because it seems like over time it served the community well to have kind of a sort of a good sense of, what can we reasonably expect from year to year to year to need to do. So we lay out 5 years of paving, or in this case, these sets of windows, then these sets of windows, then these sets of windows, because in point of fact, if we were to replace all the windows that probably need to be replaced at one time, that'd be a major hit. So that's just the rationale to this point. Doesn't mean that it, will always be that way or has to be that way. So I appreciate the way that you're framing it. Could it be? And I love questions that say, could it? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's reasonable. My response is merely to provide context and why it wasn't contemplated initially and what the general tradition has been. But
And I think the same tact that the board is choosing to take with this is what we did with asbestos. Those of you who have been on this committee for a while remember every year when we have asbestos abatement in Tom's budget, and over a period of 10 years, we spent maybe $250,000 to $260,000 a year for asbestos abatement, to redo this floor, to redo floors in the upper elementary school, Reed's Ferry School, and every single year we had that same expense, and it was a measured plan thing that you could count on. You would see that on the budget. And I think we're kind of looking at this in the same way. And as Mark said, could it wait for a master plan? Of course that it could wait for a master plan. But right now, what the Budget Committee does not have is the warrant that'll be passed out at the next meeting. It's for $265,000. And if you feel that it should be put off until the master plan is finished, you would vote not to recommend this. That would be your purview.
So I have some additional questions, but I think Carol wanted to weigh in.
Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One is those windows some of them are in very, very bad condition. I don't think most residents of the town would want windows in that condition in their own homes. And I feel like if we were to put this off to be part of a master plan, it's a timing issue partly because if this warrant article were to pass, we can start on replacing a substantial portion of the bad windows, hopefully focusing on the worst ones, next year. If we wait for a master plan, you figure we got to wait until we approve the expenditure for the master plan. We have to wait then for the recommendations of whoever we hire to consult with us on the master plan. Then there's going to have to be consultations with planning and building, with the school board. I could envision there might even be a master plan committee. So we could be talking 3 years out before we start doing anything on this actual implementation of this master plan. And I don't really think we want to let the windows go for 3 years or even 2. So that's one of my concerns. And my other thought is there's been a long time debate, both in Merrimack and I think elsewhere also, over whether it makes more sense to do big projects and bond them or smaller projects and pay as you go. And there's arguments in favor of both sides. But my own personal thought is if you can do these smaller pieces, a chunk at a time, first of all, you're getting ahead of the curve, so you're saving a little bit on inflation. You're not paying interest on a bond. So to me, it feels more cost effective to take small bites at the apple as we can afford it rather than trying to wrap everything in a giant bond and then pay interest on it over 20 years or however long we bond it for. So it's just my own thought. I understand there's different points of view on it, but that's my thinking.
Well, the other thing too, the roofs that we do one roof a year or every other year because of cost. We could do a whole bunch at once, but we'd have to bond it, and then we'd have to get 10% more voters to say yes, and you're not going to be ahead of the game when you get done, and we just keep doing it that. I think a lot of the projects we've done for the infrastructure of our buildings and other things have gone very well. We just this past summer spent, $300,000 to redo the
$325.
to redo the parking lot at the upper elementary school. Well, the elementary school, excuse me. And look how well that came out. And that had overwhelming support of the voters. I think what you're going to see here is the voters are going to support this. The school board put it out. They get to vote yes or no on this. If they vote no, well then nothing's going to get done with the windows.
Mm-hmm.
No, basically.
So can, Stan, this is
Yes,
Andy,
Andy
can I-
Schneider. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to just give the board's perspective. It's pretty close to what Carol said. The problem with the master plan is this is the first year that the master plan's been actually put out there and even considered. And the master plan is really, it's like the first step in, I think, as Carol said, multiple years of planning and understanding exactly what we want to do. And I think part of the issue is while you could get an economy of scale by putting the windows into the same project, because we don't know when that's going to happen, and because we know that these windows need to be addressed sooner, they've been in the capital improvement plan for several years, but they're getting to the point now where we can't wait as long as we did. The board felt that we would put this infrastructure project as a specific warrant article to begin addressing the problem, while in parallel we looked at this longer term master plan. I understand where we could say that they could be included, and if the timing was right, potentially could. I'm just concerned that the timing of the implementation of whatever the master plan does may not align with the time frame we need. So that's sort of I think the belief of the board and why we chose to do this.
Okay. And is that, before I come back to you, is there anybody else that has anything to say about the windows? I'd also like to just remind everybody, the next Tuesday night, we're gonna be talking warrant articles. We will not be voting on them. We will be talking about them and getting a presentation where more discussion on this warrant article, I'm pretty sure, is gonna happen. Andy?
Thank you. My next question is on the middle school drainage. And Tom, I hate to do this to you, but I'm going to quote you. You said this is the first step of many, that could be many steps.
Sure.
I'm interested in what the many steps may be if this step doesn't work out.
We would have to go with underfield drainage, that we would end up digging up the entire field, putting additional drainage in the field to try to get the water away. So this is, like I said, the first step. The next step would go to actually digging up the field, putting drainage pipes in there, and trying to drain the whole field, which would be a much more costly step. So the first step, obviously, it's hopefully cost saving, and it will meet our goals, meaning extend the time that the middle school can spend on their field, both for athletics and also for their gym classes.
If we have a wet winter, the field is inundated. And what the engineer said, if you don't have a wet winter, like this winter, it's probably not gonna be too bad. But we can't do anything until we put in this pipe with the film over it to try and draw a bunch of that water away first. Because if you do the pipes under the field, you still got to do the other thing first.
Correct. And I
So-
think that the snow load is one part of it, but also if we receive a lot of heavy rain, that would impact us also.
So if I understand this correctly, the risk to this first plan is potentially that it doesn't work. Then the second step would be underfilled drainage. Do we have a quote on what that second step?
No, we don't.
No, we don't. But regardless of the second step, the first step needs to be done. And if it doesn't work, you're going to have to do the second step. So regardless of whether or not it works 100%, but I bet you it's going to work at least 75%, because we did have a swale in that area. And that swale was of a pretty good size, and over the years, things slid down, and now the swale is not there, because the swale was taking the water away from that area, and it was pitching it downfield, correct, Tom?
As Matt says, we do have a swale there, and it does take a lot of the surface water. The reason why we're going back with the secondary drain is we're gonna put it deeper into the ground, so we're just not gathering the surface water off the hill. What we're gathering is the water that follows the glacier till down underneath the surface that percolates up. So as Matt mentioned to us, no matter what steps we take, this would definitely be our first step and the most prudent step to take, at least costly. So we might not have to spend that extra money.
So, and I understand that this step has to be done regardless.
Correct.
I guess my question, and the problem I have, and that I haven't been able to get my head wrapped around, is we're asking the taxpayers to take a leap of faith in a mud puddle, if you will, because that's what this is, a $75,000 leap of faith. But what we haven't told them is, how deep is this mud puddle? What is the end cost? What could this end up costing the taxpayers? We don't know what step two could cost. So we've evaluated the risk. We've said, okay, the risk to this plan is it may not work, and we may have to do underfill drainage, but we've never costed that risk. We've never told the taxpayers or the school board, from what I've heard, what that risk could potentially cost the school district. And so how do we go to the taxpayers and say, please make a $75,000 investment in this problem? It could cost you more. We don't know how much more it could cost you. And so I'm a little disappointed. I would have liked to have seen this cut out and go to a warrant article so the voters could be educated about this particular problem and what the potential cost could be. But unfortunately, now it's buried in an operating budget, so we have a choice. We're either going to approve the operating budget or not. But I just don't know what we're asking the taxpayers to get into here. Is it $75,000? Is it $150,000? Is it $2 million? I don't know what, this is step one of something, and I don't know what we're asking the taxpayers.
Well, you know, we're not taking an educated guess. We've had Steve Keach from Keach Nordstrom Associates. He's a civil engineer. He's also a resident of this town and has been in front of the planning board many times, and he has helped us out significantly. And in his estimation, looking at that site, being there, he thinks this is a viable thing to do to get more time on that field that may solve the problem for you. It's not particularly, I wouldn't classify it as a mud puddle. I would classify it as a field that has poor drainage. I think mud puddle is a little severe. But
That was kind of a
this is-
joke, so.
Oh, I didn't see you smiling. So anyway, the drainage pipe is there, $75,000. Steve Keach has given us his assurance as a civil engineer in this town for 30-something years. And we feel it's a good step that you're going to have to do anyway, and it will give the middle school and perhaps the high school some added functionality that they did not have this year. It's not the prelude to a huge expense. It can be done, it can be evaluated. It will definitely make the situation better, but that doesn't guarantee that we're going to spend $250,000, $300,000 next year because this doesn't make the field usable 100% of the time in the pouring rain and everything like that. It's not setting anybody up for a larger expense down the road. It's only going to help us today and hopefully for years to come.
So I want to just expand on what Matt said, because what he just said is actually very important. The taxpayers and all the bodies who oversee the budget have a say at every step of this process. So nothing is going to be surprise. We have an issue in Merrimack that's been discussed for a long time of insufficient fields. We just don't have, and pretty much ask anybody, they tell you that. So the original calculus was we have a field that is not being able to be used maximally because of drainage issues. And so, you know, we have basically an entire spring sports schedule for which one field cannot be used for anything. Most seasons, particularly in a season where there is, you know, some snow or particularly rainy, and, you know, we don't always have as much snow as we used to, but we certainly can count on rain. And the issue there is that because of the underlayment or whatever of that, that's not the right word, but whatever the geology of that area is, it's getting saturated now. And so in addition to the inability of our just curriculum to be delivered as it was intended sometimes in the spring outside. So the issue there was, there have been people who've contemplated, you know, having a turf field and what have you. And so we've said, well, why don't we see if we can maximize the use of the fields we have? And so what's proposed is something that Steve Keach, in his experience, is thinking could actually solve the problem. What we know is it will likely make the problem better, which translates to we can probably, if this is done, use the field more than we currently can. If, to Matt's point, we find out that that fix is insufficient, then we can stop it right there.
Yep,
And,
but we're $75,000
right, you let him finish?
but if I could just say, I agree, but we didn't say, I mean, you've got to hear this. This will fix the problem to some degree. Right now, we can't use that field almost any season in the spring. Just can't.
I guess the
So
thing,
if I could just finish, Matt, and
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to say, so I hear your point, and again, this is something that, is to be discussed by yet another entity who has the right and the privilege to discuss the budget. But don't hear that this $75,000 might prove useless. It's going to produce a gain. That's known. The question is, will it be everything we want or not? So what we would say is, if we have a field that we cannot use, and we can invest some money and use it some more, that's the question for people to contemplate. If it proves to not be this 100% solution, then we can say, are we good with just having a field that we can use more than we used to? That could be good enough. That could be good enough. Or do we just, and therefore say, then we're not going to do any more? Or do we say, well, we actually do want to invest, but that's going to be something that's going to be fully vetted and fully discussed. But it's not $75,000, and will it work or won't? It will work. The question is, will it work to 100%, getting us back 100% use of that? That's the question right there. So I don't think it's accurate to suggest that it's $75,000 that may be a total bust, because that's not the case.
But it may be $75,000 of step one of a much bigger project.
Have you ever stood on the field?
Pardon me?
Have you ever been on the field?
No.
Okay.
Well,
I don't think that matters when you talk about, good project planning practices. And I think typically when you plan out a project, you evaluate your risk, you go out and you cost your risk, so people know what the potential cost could be. Now, if phase one only works, say it's 50% effective, and the school district's fine with that, and then we're not gonna go back to the taxpayers and ask for additional money, that's fine. But if there's a potential that we could go to step two, I think it's fair to tell the taxpayers what step two may potentially cost.
And I guess I would counter that at the point at which, and it wouldn't be the school district administration, it would be the school board, and with the support of the administration providing, the research, but it would be at that point, that's been my point. It would be at that point that we'd say, here's what we find. That project got us this. To go the next step, it'll be that. And then at that point, there's no way that, we're going to be able to just swoop in and do round two without, all the vetting that's happening now. So I hear your point. Would it be possible to anticipate what that round two would look like? I suppose that we could hire an engineer, and that would cost some money to do that, and then we could develop that. What I'm saying is that if it appeared to be necessary to go to or to advocate for a round two because we don't have the field usage that we would like to have, then we'll come back and we'll certainly have to lay out for the taxpayer what would round two look like. So it's a question of I think what you're saying is, could we do it now? Well, we didn't. But at the point when we would decide as a community whether we wanted to, well, then there would be all this conversation and vetting again, and then the community would decide what they wanted to do with it.
Knowing
And I
Steve,
think you're right. I think the fundamental difference is my preference would be to have that done before we started. And I think you're saying your preference is let's do phase one and then we'll look at phase two.
I think
So
that was,
that's our
I think that
fundamental.
was, I think that, yes, I don't think, I know that was the thinking. And like with most things, there could be and are legitimate alternative viewpoints, and none are better than the,
Sure.
Some are probably better than the other. But I don't feel like, I think that your point is well taken. That is
I'm
the
going to
fundamental
interject here.
difference.
Having known Steve Keach for as long as I have, and known what he's done for the school district and for the town on engineering and fields, I have 100% confidence in him. If he's comfortable with this drainage pipe, is going to give us a fighting chance. And we can't use it can't go the next step without it. I don't want to get hung up on saying how much it's going to cost to dig up that whole field and put in underground drainage, when that wouldn't be coming for at least 2 years down the road. I am going to take a little chairman's privilege here and say that we move on because we got other things to do. We'll be talking about this warrant article next week, and we will be voting on it on the 13th of February.
This is not a warrant article.
Well, it's in the operating budget,
Yeah,
so
I
you'd
know
be
that.
talking it as part of the operating budget.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing, and this is kind of tongue in cheek here, this is not money down the drain.
Yeah, you're right about
It's
that.
water down the drain, so.
Is that a joke?
Dan, can I
Yes,
just get one
that
quick
is a
answer?
joke.
Make it
Something?
extremely quick, Carol.
It's very quick. If we put in this drainage pipe, are we going to be recreating the swale as part of that?
You won't need the swell.
That would be something we would look at the same time. I would say that it makes sense to do that at the same time.
Yeah. You're digging the hole anyway, so you would recreate the
That's kind of my
swale.
thought.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the swale helped us a lot when it existed, so I'm kind of thinking it would help us again.
Do we have any other questions or comments for maintenance? Yes, go ahead.
I have one that's not related to what we've talked about this evening, but I've been receiving questions about heat and lighting. Do we keep the lights and the heat on at night and over the weekends? And if so, can you explain why for people watching at home?
The heat on over the weekends and at night. We do not. We normally have a night setback that we set everything down to, and it's basically cost savings as far as that. In the lighting, we always turn the lights on in the areas that we're on, and they do come on when we need them. And I guess I didn't follow you on the lighting. I'm sorry.
Just do the lights stay, are the lights turned on at night and on the weekends? Or are they turned off?
They're only turned on if there's a facilities use going on in the evening. Every classroom here has an automatic shut off. Like if in this room, if it's still wired that way, and I think it is.
It is. When I
If-
walked over the
if-
door
Yeah,
to get the cable I had to get for my daughter,
yeah.
the minute I
the
walked
lights
in
went
there,
on.
turned the lights on.
So if we were to sit still and not move for like 20 minutes, this room would go dark. So,
There are a number of areas in the district that do have security lights in it. So some lighting would be on, but
Yep.
the majority of it would not.
Thank you.
Andy Schneider, you had something?
Yeah, so I think I actually did hear about this. The concern is that over the last few weeks, when people have been driving around, they've noticed that the lights at JMUS have been on until like 11 or 12 o'clock at night sometimes. And there was a question about whether they were on because the janitorial staff is working, or is there something that's incorrectly handled with the lights in JMUS? Because I did notice that myself the other night when I was coming home late. So,
Yeah, one of the rooms in the second floor.
well, no, it's the whole. It's like the whole building.
Oh, okay. I went by and it was one room on the second floor that was lit.
And
Yeah,
I think it's
I've
just-
seen one or two rooms.
Yeah.
I think the key is it's just something to check to make sure that they're working the right way.
Okay.
well, the custodians are in the building during the week until, when does their shift get over?
11 o'clock?
11 o'clock?
11 o'clock at night. And on the
So-
weekends, we use most of our buildings during the weekend. So
Yeah.
we're in here all the time.
Okay, Carol, Andy? Carol?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm all set.
Any other questions for maintenance? Yes, Lee?
I had two, actually. First, as we went through the budget, we took the separate line items for the Brentwood building into consideration. And as we tallied the water, sewer, gas, electric, and oil, we noticed that we were spending about $23,000 a year just in those maintenance costs to support this building in its non-use. I just wanted that put on the record that, and those are just the tallies of the thing that we can put a price on. And noted in our session with you that there were other things, you send a gentleman over there on a weekly basis to make sure nobody's gotten in there and everything's copacetic. and you do mow the fields, et cetera. So there are additional costs outside that $23,000 a year that we're spending just to keep this building alive.
Sure.
Okay, can I chime in on that one?
Sure.
Go ahead, Andy
Sure, so-
Snyder.
Yeah, so I think the key is that obviously there was a proposed budget item to raise the Brentwood building for, I think it was 125,000 plus those incremental heating and electrical costs. And we felt that given the fact that we're trying to do a master plan, and again, Andy, this goes to your thing about trying to economy of scale. We felt a little uncomfortable tearing that building down without the master plan being considered, just to make sure what it is we wanted to do with that space. So we didn't have to do part of it, pay cash to have it done, and then be able to change it later on. So, and I think the thing that we discovered during the school board deliberations is that there is now a use for that building that we're finding with law enforcement to do sort of training within the building. They've used it, I think, so far 4 times. It's an opportunity for us to allow other law enforcement agencies to potentially use it. There's a possibility we could even get income out of this. That's one of the things we're trying to check. But the board felt that for the next year, to invest the $23,000 to keep it up, let the master plan be considered and looked at, and then be able to find a way that we can maybe get revenue for this. It's unclear if we can, but at least it's being used by law enforcement. So it's not a dead building like we thought it was. There actually is a use for it. So that's the rationale behind why the board chose to do what we did.
Andy, you can't.
And can I chime in?
No.
Go ahead, Ben.
You can't use that building and try to rent it out without having to do all the improvements at a cost of over $60,000.
No, Stan, that's not correct. If the law enforcement's going to use it for training, for shooter training or whatever, there is no need to retrofit the building. It can be used as is. We verified that based on the police feedback to us. So you don't need to invest anything in it for that.
Yeah, and we can also tear it down.
Do we
correct.
think that the renting of that facility would come anywhere near the cost of its maintenance annually?
It's unclear what the opportunity is for that, but it does have inherent value to our own police department to use it rent-free, so there's a benefit there as well. So, again, that's the school board logic for that.
Still at a cost of over $23,000 a year.
That is correct.
Thank you. My second.
Andy, is there any scenario, no matter what the master plan ends up being, is there any scenario where we would not tear that building down?
Likely not, but if you bundle it in with any work that's being done in that complex, you could save a lot of money by including it with other things that are being done rather than bringing a crew in specifically for that purpose. A one-shot deal.
Without getting too involved in this crazy thing, because there is nothing in the budget to tear this down at this current time. The purpose all along was we were buying the land. We didn't want the building. And the one immediate need that tearing that building down would have, after you put gravel over it, is more parking, even if it's only temporary. But we don't have any warrant articles for it at the current time. Chuck, last one.
Well, I'm a little confused that suddenly we have found an occupant for that building that is being touted as useful to the town of Merrimack. I approached the district last year and volunteered to start an agricultural program inside that barn where I would raise chickens and sheep and goats and geese and all manner of feather and fowl, and supply not only the agricultural interests that might be associated with education, but for those individuals who may feel that they want a service animal, like a goat or a sheep that they could adopt and so forth. I think it would be a great program for the school district. And I think one that is fitting of the present condition of that building. I'm disappointed that we didn't have more opportunities on the part of the school board to invite such creative thinking about how to use the building for the public good. Particularly since even at that time I had no idea whatsoever that the school board was going to spend $25,000 a year to heat the building and provide electricity and those sorts of things. Why, that would have been a great boon to my agricultural idea and my association with the school district for those kinds of interdisciplinary educational experiences.
We'll call that
Okay, moving right along. We got to advance to district-wide.
I did have one further question. Sorry for.
Make it quick.
We'll make it quick. Also in our discussions, we talked about the roof systems at the upper elementary and elementary Master Kohler. And one of the things you mentioned was that one of the roof structures there was put in place in 1986.
Yes.
So again, there's no telling how long a roof will last, and certainly that's well beyond its expected lifetime. So if you could, what would your plan be to work on that structure?
The way the roofs have worked for us in the evaluation process we went through, we have roughly 11 and a quarter acres of roof. It divides its way into 73 sections. What we did is, many years ago when we first started looking into roofing, we came up with the conclusion that we had roughly 73% of our roofs that were off warranty. And why that is important to me is normally how I gauge a roof is you have to go by the average. And normally, once a warranty is given, that's pretty much what the manufacturer feels that it'll live up to, so they won't have to incur any cost. My thought on that is normally you look at a roof and you go 5 years over their warranty, and at that point you really need to start evaluating, because that could be a roof that could go relatively quickly. We've moved through the years of doing roofs on a regular basis, because in the beginning of doing roofs we were more reactive than proactive. We've hit to the stage where we become now, we don't have to be reactive. We're looking at roofs in the fact of, let's take them systematically, let's just move through them and make sure we're completing them ahead of the failure rate. With that said, the roofs that we have now, we have a number of roofs in line for a replacement. We do a yearly evaluation. As Master Kohler's in Master Kohler elementary schools, Master Kohler upper and Master Kohler elementary schools have been on the top of our list for the last 2 years. We also have Thornton's Ferry, which is in second place. So what we would do, as we do every year, is we would evaluate it, and we would come back. The evaluation is right now, does it have a impact that we think there will be a failure within next year? The answer is no. Are there leaks? Yes, but we can contain them, and we can make sure they're repaired in time. So at this time, we're going to go on, as we do next year, evaluate all the roofs again, come up with an order and bring that to the forefront so everybody can look at it and decide what they want to do. And at that time, we would give you a up-to-date evaluation, and that's what we've been doing every year.
My concern is that a roof from 1986, even with your 10-year warranty and 5-year gap beyond that, that's still 19 years beyond what it should have been warranted for. So I applaud your detailed, checking these out every year. This one scares me.
It does, but amazingly, we've had roofs where it's 2 years away from coming off warranty, and they're in much worse shape.
Sure.
And this one seems to be holding up. I mean, that's why it moves. That's why we didn't do it 10 years ago.
Yep.
Because we're having less leaks, we're having less problems, and it is a built-up roof, which we have better luck with long term. So that's what I have for that one.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question of Tom?
Go ahead.
Have we ever done any analysis of the roofs and the various vendors we've used to do roofing, and whether we get more lifetime, regardless of what the actual warranty is, whether we've gotten better longevity out of a roof using vendor X versus vendor Y?
Well, that's.
Can I, for 1 second? Yeah, first of all, we're discussing roofs, and just for point of clarification, there is no money in this operating budget for roofs, nor is there anything in the warrant articles for roofs. So we're talking
That's
about
true.
something that is not existent right now. But yes, Tom, you can go ahead and talk about the various processes that we've used in the past. And last year, I remember saying at the board meeting that we would hire an independent roofing consultant to look at our roofs and evaluate what we have. We have done that.
We have.
We have a report from him, and we were prepared to go out to bid. Every time we do roofs, we get three bidders. We have specified a roofing structure that has a 40-year warranty. There are some people that I have spoken to and who have spoken to me that says we are paying too much for the 40-year warranty and that we should get a roof with like a 15-year warranty. Well, maybe the 15-year warranty will have the good fortune of lasting from like 1986 until today, like Tom's roof that we were just talking about, and maybe it won't. So that was one of the things that we put in the bid specification. So we're not specifying a brand of roof anymore. We're specifying the components we want and the specificity of the specifications that we want. And we want something with a longer warranty than your average 15 or 20-year roof, which is less expensive. But in the long run, the ones with a longer warranty are more cost-effective to everybody because we don't have to talk about them again. Once they're done, they're done. And Tom and I are not going to be here talking about a roof we do next year with a 40-year warranty ever again. So it is what it is, and that's our philosophy.
I was really trying to get at individual roofing companies that we've had experience with, whether we've seen better longevity out of whatever certain roofers do rather than what other roofers do.
Carol, it's more the manufacturer of the roofing product, because they're the ones who are doing the warranty. And what's been happening in the past with the school district is that if you're going to install this roof, you got to be certified by the manufacturer to install the roof. So you can't be the fly-by-night roofer with the extra pot of tire in the back of his truck. You got to be somebody who's reputable, and the manufacturer is the one honoring the warranty. Just if you didn't know that, that's what they've been doing.
Yeah, I do know what you're talking about. I just also, I feel like it's a mixture of, yes, the roofing product that you choose has a big impact on how long it lasts. But I also think there's a secondary factor of some installers probably do a better job than others.
Well, every time we've taken a bid on a roof, it's been the lowest bid, and it happened to have been an installer that comes with very good references as far as the volume of work that they have done over the years, the longevity of the company, their financials. We're certainly not going to hire a roofing company that's been in business for a couple of years who does residential or something like that, because we're commercial facilities right here. So anybody who bids on the roof has to be pre-qualified. And then once they're pre-qualified, when we get their bids in, we're pretty satisfied with whoever. But sometimes based on past experience with a particular contractor, we won't have them back for a year, even if they do bid. So it all depends.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you, Tom, and good night.
Thank you.
Now, and last on the list of reviews is district-wide. Liaisons were myself, Brian, Carol, and Chuck. We always do district-wide last. I guess it's the biggest part of the budget and everything else. You gentlemen had a pretty interesting year in your first year having to work on the budget. And I will say you did an exemplary job. And as you can tell by my hoarseness, I'm not going to talk too much if I can help it. Matt, if you would like to start off and take us off with the
Sure.
district-wide budget for
Yeah,
this
I can do
upcoming
that,
year.
definitely. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting term, district-wide budget, but it includes a lot of accounts that are for every employee. So, it kind of fits. The district-wide budget is composed of items of a contractual nature. The retirement incentive for the teachers in the teacher contract. We're required, and these contracts are published online. Anybody can go look at them for the MTA and the Merrimack Educational Support Staff Association. That there's a retirement incentive in the contract for the teachers. The board has to fund a minimum of 7 requests, and these requests can only come from those staff members who are over the age of 55 and have been with the school district for at least 15 years. That's one of the contractual obligations. We also have health insurance. You'll see that number there. That number is now $450,000 less than what is published in your book. We got a 8.4% increase. And the year prior, it was around 13.7. The year prior to that, it was around 3.4. And the year prior to that, it was around 9%. So we're fluctuating. It's the guaranteed maximum rate. And in April, what happens is we'll know the actual rate. Probably once in 20 years, I've seen the actual rate come in less than the guaranteed maximum rate, and that was a long time ago. So in looking around and looking at other various districts, one to the north of us, we're in the same ballpark with the percentage increase that we're getting this year as far as health insurance. Dental was a minor increase. It really kind of has remained flat. It's not a rate increase that would fluctuate over the years. We have our insurances for property and liability. We have FICA. We have New Hampshire retirement for both the teachers and for the classified staff, meaning the paraprofessionals, the custodians, the administrative assistants, the kindergarten instructional assistants. Those people fall into the area of classified staff. Years ago, the state of New Hampshire used to contribute a percentage of this cost for us and for every other district and school and every other district and every other town in the state of New Hampshire. They backed out of that commitment that was probably done since 1975 in order to help balance their budget at the state level at the expense of increasing our cost at the local level. So I'll just mention that. We have support staff improvement. We have, professional staff improvement. It's all in the contract. If you look at, section 3.1B in the teacher's contract, you'll see workshops, undergraduate, you'll see graduate studies. You'll see the district initiatives at 3.2. We have unemployment comp, workers' comp. Those are actual quotes from our carrier, which is New Hampshire Primex. It's a public insurance exchange as opposed to being a corporation company on the private market. The good thing about that is it's kind of a pooled risk group where a lot of school districts and towns belong to. We have transportation. It's a contractual 3.5% increase in the budgeted contract amount for 2021. We also have, you'll see charter school transportation in there. That was removed by the school board. We have a history of not spending that for the past few years, so the school board thought it best that this is a risk we could run with and not have to worry about it. We have items like debt service, principal and interest. After 23-24, we'll be finished paying for the middle school, and that would be the last year that we have a debt payment of any sort. So the school district will be debt-free after that period. The middle school was a 20-year bond, and the high school addition, which is the 3-story piece that you see next to our greenhouse central office. That was a $5.9 million bond that was taken out for 20 years, which is an interesting thing for $5.9 million. So, but it is what it is, and it'll be over in 2021. We have school district auditors, we have legal services, meetings, equipment repair. A couple of items on the last page, page 15, that we've kind of talked about. You'd see the last two items on the page, the district-wide site development. That's the master plan. You'll see $100,000 in there. But when we went to create a warrant article, I got an adjusted price from Steve Keach. And Steve assured me we could do that portion for around $82.5 with a little bit of a comfort factor in there just in case. You always have to have a contingency or management reserve or whatever else you want to call it. And then the removal and site preparation of the Brentwood facility, which is on the bottom of that page, that was, which we've already kind of talked about, that was cut and removed by the school board. So in essence, that is a brief overview of the district-wide budget, and if our liaisons or whoever would like to make any comments, we'll field them at those times. If not, we'll, answer questions.
Carol, do you have anything to say about the district-wide budget?
No, I think I'm all set.
Chuck? I'm all set. And I'm all set. I'll just say you guys did, a good job with what you had to be offered. Don't agree with all of it, but that's okay.
That's why we're all here, so
That's right.
absolutely.
Do we have any questions on the district-wide budget? Andy Hunter.
I just have a small question, if I'm still allowed to ask questions.
Absolutely, sir.
Unemployment compensation, I see that dropped like almost by 50%.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah.
That's a good thing, huh?
It is. Is there a reason behind that?
Yeah, that was, let me just take a look at it specifically. That was a quote we got from our carrier, workers' compensation, district-wide. Okay, yeah, it's going from 230, you're on page 6. Okay, what happened, the expended in 2018, 2019, that's what you're looking at right there, when you're saying drop.
Well, so last year, the budget was Excuse me.
234,
So-
696,
No,
and now it's
you're looking at
253.
workers' comp. I'm looking at the line above
Oh,
unemployment.
I'm sorry. Unemployment compensation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
last year was 58K. This
Yeah.
year it's down to 28K.
28,
And I'm just
yeah.
wondering why that is. That's just a quote from
Yeah, that's from New Hampshire Primex. That's an actual quote that's written out, and not a quote, but it's guaranteed for us, and it's because the unemployment rate is so low. It's one of the benefits of
It's like
a good
2.9%
economy.
or some crazy thing.
It's at its natural,
2.6, yeah.
You gotta
resting
appreciate
place. Yeah.
Very difficult
See?
to get
Very harmless,
employees. At least it's not 20% like in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions on the district-wide budget? Boy, the biggest budget in the whole thing, and you guys get out the easiest.
For now.
That concludes the info session on the rest of the departments. At this time, are there any members of the public that would like to speak about anything we've reviewed tonight? Seeing as how everybody's disguised as a blue seat. Yes, and I appreciate that the fact you're sticking by your other half the whole night. Make sure he takes you out to dinner.
Most restaurants are closed at this hour.
Next week, next Tuesday, February 4th, 7 o'clock, here, we will be reviewing warrant articles. We will not be voting on them. We will vote on them on the 13th of February.
Why is that?
Because the date to submit petition warrant articles expires on February 11th. And it's possible that one of those warrant articles could get changed before then. Also, it's a work session. If you have adjustments you feel should be made to the operating budget, that's the night to propose them. And we've done it a couple of different ways. We used to start out with the highest adjustments down to the lowest, and we've done it by departments. I'm still kind of betwixt and between which one I want to do. But that's what will happen then. On the 13th of February, and that's a Thursday night, we will have a meeting at 7 o'clock. That'll be to take care of voting on the warrant articles and any other minor adjustments before 7:30. At 7:30, the public hearing will take place. This is the only public hearing on the operating budget of the school district. That's when Joe Q. Citizen can come up to the mic and ask questions and talk about it. We let him know what's going on. After the public hearing closes, we will take a final vote on the recommendation for the number for the operating budget. And on the warrant articles, we can only vote to recommend or not recommend. We can't change any of the numbers in the warrant articles. And there are no negotiated contracts to worry about this year. If you can't make the meeting, either on the 4th or on the 13th, please let me know. And as a warning, if the 13th meeting gets snowed out, we will meet on Tuesday, the 18th of February. And that is the drop dead date to have the last date we can have a public hearing. So if it's a blizzard and there's no school, we're having that public hearing. If we gotta send out a 4x4 or a snow sled to get you in here, we will do that. And it's been done before. So I would like to thank you all for attending this.
Dan, can I throw out a comment? I don't know how else to fit it in.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know who did the setup tonight, but whoever did it, the sound quality from my end was so much better. Whatever you did, keep doing it.
Merrimack TV.
Well, whatever they did, it worked way better.
Well, that's because it's at the high school too.
No, I'm even comparing to other times we've met
Okay.
at the high school.
Wow.
Something worked way better tonight. I don't know what it was.
Okay. We don't have to, we can't adjourn because it's not a meeting. But thank you all for coming. Good night. Please turn in your signs. See you on the 4th.